yet. We'll see what happens.
Mueller's investigators have asked various witnesses about conversations in the White House about pardons.
The president has the authority to pardon individuals, but it hasn't been discussed.
The question hinges on whether dangling a pardon could amount to obstruction.
If an offer was made, we could be right in the middle of impeachment territory.
This is New Day with Chris Coumo and Alison Camerata.
All right, welcome to our viewers in the United States and around the world. This is your new day. It's Thursday, March 29th, 6 o'clock here in New York. Here's our starting line. President Trump firing his embattled VA secretary and tapping his White House doctor to replace him. The president insists Dr. Ronnie Jackson is, quote, highly trained and qualified, but he has no real management experience. And if confirmed, Jackson will run the federal government's second largest department. It has hundreds of thousands of employees, well over 300,000, and it is plagued by inefficiencies. The New York Times reports that President Trump's former lawyer, John Dowd, may have floated the idea of pardoning fired National Security Advisor Michael Flynn and former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort as the special counsel was building cases against both men. Was Dowd trying to influence Flynn and Manafort to keep them from cooperating with the investigation?
So Robert Mueller's probe has now drawn a direct link between a Trump campaign official and Russian intelligence officials. A new court filing says former deputy campaign manager Rick Gates made frequent calls to a person the FBI believes had active links to Russian spy services. So we'll get into that. And in the world of entertainment, Roseanne Barr is back after 2 decades. Her sitcom's reboot, drawing millions of viewers for its premiere. The huge ratings catching the attention of President Trump. We'll tell you about the call he reportedly made to the show's star. So let's begin our coverage with CNN's Abby Phillips. She is live at the White House with our top story. Abby.
Good morning, Allison. It seems like every week that goes by, there's another firing here at this White House. This time, it's the former VA Secretary, David Shulkin, who is now out and replaced with the president's personal White House physician, whose qualifications as a physician are not in question, but certainly his qualifications to run one of the federal government's biggest and most troublesome bureaucracies are now in question. President Trump firing embattled Veterans Affairs Secretary David Shulkin, the latest in a series of high-profile departures in the last month. Sources tell CNN that Chief of Staff John Kelly notifying Shulkin of his termination in a phone call before the president made the announcement public on Twitter. His departure was expected after damaging revelations that Shulkin and his wife used taxpayer dollars for a European trip, a trip that at least 4 administration officials cautioned him not to take. In a new op-ed, Shulkin claiming he was falsely accused and blasting the toxic, chaotic, and disrespectful environment in Washington for preventing him from doing his job. In a surprise move, President Trump tapping his White House physician, Navy Rear Admiral Ronnie Jackson, as his nominee to head the VA. White House officials tell CNN it's because the president was pleased with how Jackson handled questions praising his health back in January.
There's no indication whatsoever that he has any cognitive issues. His overall health is excellent. I told the president that if he had a healthier diet over the last 20 years, he might live to be 200 years old. I don't know. I mean, he has incredible genes.
A source tells CNN that Mr. Trump has been floating Jackson's name during recent conversations with advisors, but wasn't taken seriously. This upheaval coming as the White House faces new questions about whether President Trump offered to pardon 2 top advisors at the center of the Russia probe in exchange for their silence. The New York Times reports that the president's former lead lawyer, John Dowd, discussed the idea of Mr. Trump pardoning fired National Security Advisor Michael Flynn and former campaign chairman Paul Manafort with their lawyers last year if they were to be criminally charged in the special counsel's investigation. The Washington Post reports that these conversations took place last summer, before Manafort was charged with financial crimes and before Flynn cut a deal with Mueller in exchange for pleading guilty to lying to the FBI. The White House dodging questions about pardons, reading a statement from the White House lawyer Ty Cobb.
No pardons are under discussion or under consideration at the White House.
Dowd denies having any discussions related to pardons, even after reports surfaced back in July that Mr. Trump was considering granting pardons to those under investigation.
The report does say that the president has even inquired about the ability to pardon himself.
As recently as December, the president leaving open the possibility of pardoning Flynn.
I don't want to talk about pardons for Michael Flynn yet. We'll see what happens.
After 6 days of having no public events here at the White House, we will actually see President Trump today when he travels to tout his infrastructure plan, $200 billion infrastructure plan out in Ohio. I guess it is Infrastructure Week or Infrastructure Day here again, Allison and Chris.
Abby, thank you very much. Let's bring in CNN political analysts John Avlon and Karin Demersion to talk about all of this. So, John, right, Dr. Ronny Jackson, this is an interesting pick. Reportedly, the president had floated this with some of his advisors, and they thought that he was joking, or they didn't think that this would actually happen. But in fact, he trusts his personal White House doctor, because this doctor travels with him regularly. This doctor knows him fairly intimately, and he's decided to give him this huge responsibility of the second biggest agency in the government.
This is an agency with an $186 billion budget, over 300,000 employees. I am sure Dr. Jackson is a charming guy. He certainly did well defending the president on air at length after the physical. Some of the particulars may come up in confirmation hearings, as Chris was saying a little earlier, but it's not a criteria for running this kind of bureaucracy. Some kind of management experience is a bonus. And remember, this is a president who also wanted to nominate his personal pilot to run the FAA. So this is somebody who's sort of, who do I know, who's nearest, how about you? Right. That's not the way to attract the rest of the right.
Even the way we were describing it there, Karin, well, look, he knows him, he likes him, he travels with him. Since when does that equate with run 377,000 people, hundreds of billions of dollars is going to flow through that thing, and we know that it has been failing at its mission for generations. It is so sensitive. It is so fundamental. Are those the qualifications? I know the guy. I like him. He told people I weigh only 233 pounds. This is a good man. And he wears a uniform. Let's go. Is that enough?
I mean, for the president, it's a really important criteria that he feels like he can get along with the guy, that he feels like the guy is, is praising him, but not just, with puff. I mean, this is a doctor who's served 3 presidents. He is a nonpartisan, and so there is a little bit of legitimacy behind his words of adulation of the president, because he really does have a pretty solid reputation on the medical
As a doctor.
As a doctor,
right. Serving as a doctor.
Exactly. Now, you could make the argument that some of the biggest problems that have plagued the Department of Veterans Affairs have to do with health care, right? And so maybe he'd be sympathetic, sure. But you're right, he doesn't have any management experience to speak of. Maybe he'll turn out to have quite a knack for this, but there's no proof of that. He's going to get grilled for it in his confirmation hearings, but I would not assume that this is going to tank him, because, again, unless we find something of his positions or his experience that really, lets us know that he's going to actually potentially provably be a detriment to this department, the Republicans in Congress or in the Senate are usually pretty inclined to give him a pass.
I'm sure he'll get the votes, but that's like a false standard now. I mean, basically they go along with anything. But I'm just saying you have to scrutinize the choice independent of that, because if we just go on what they'll vote for, then really anything goes.
Look, yeah, and one of the big issues right now is at the department is what are they going to do in terms of the number of veterans that are able to see private doctors is a big question. We don't really know where he stands on that. The fact that he is a doctor, but he's been in uniform for a long time, I mean, it could give him an interesting perspective, but it's going to be really important to see where he stands on those sorts of major issues that really will dictate how efficiently the department runs, where the funding will be coming from, and what we'll be doing going forward with this agency that has had serious problems managing its affairs the last few years.
Here's how the current VA secretary, who was just fired, Shulkin, describes some of those problems in a New York Times op-ed that came out last night. Unfortunately, the department has become entangled in a brutal power struggle, with some political appointees choosing to promote their agendas instead of what's best for veterans. These individuals, who seek to privatize veteran health care as an alternative to government-run VA care, unfortunately failed to engage in realistic plans regarding who will care for the more than 9 million veterans who rely on the department for life-sustaining care. He's sounding the alarm on his way out.
Yep, and he's trying to say this is largely about a policy debate, and to some extent it may be. It also may be somebody who wasn't about White House infighting as much as this president rewards.
Well, he also got busted with something that was perceived as misfeasance. Using taxpayer money the wrong way for a vacation.
Yeah, for a European vacation, and that itself is not obviously acceptable. But now the attention will be, I think the larger issue is governing by gut has a bad track record when it comes to major decisions. And this is another example of that from this president. It's who's nearby, who do I like, how about you?
It's also who has complimented me.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, who likes me a lot. And so this is, let's just remind people of what Dr. Jackson said when he was telling the press about President Trump's glowing health record.
There's no indication whatsoever that he has any cognitive issues. The president, you know, he's very sharp. He's very articulate. The president's health is excellent. It's called genetics.
Oh, genetics.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it seems like,
yeah, there you go.
yeah, I mean, look, as perhaps he too is a little bit astounded by the lifestyle the president keeps and the fact that he's in decent health.
233 pounds?
200, I think it was 239, Chris, but I might be misremembering. Whatever it was one notch.
Rounded up for the cheeseburgers in bed.
Well, but that was exactly it. I thought it was that it was 1 pound shy of what it would have been to the obesity.
Just for a sense of scale.
No, but what we're supposed to do with that?
That is a surprisingly low. Let me help you.
Yes.
That is a surprisingly low number. That he weighs maybe 15 pounds more than I do.
Muscle mass weighs more, as we know, right?
Are you waiting?
Are you guys doctors, or did you sleep at a Holiday Inn Express last night? It's not that big a difference, and there's plenty of goo on me too. It's more dad bod than anything else. But the point is this: he likes this guy. What we're getting his pushback is he's not a guy. He's an admiral. And with an admiral rank, that is a designation, being a rear admiral, of a level of experience and expertise that they're saying transfers into capability of this type of management experience. Do you buy that?
It's probably not sufficient for running a almost $200 billion budget. He has no doubt he's a charming guy with an impressive personal record, but this is a different skill set. Maybe he can make the leap, maybe he won't, but it speaks to the president's judgment. Again, he wanted to nominate his personal pilot to run the FAA. Next thing you're going to know, he's going to nominate a chauffeur to run the transportation department.
Look, I think the concern is
that there's virtue.
It was supposed to be.
Mr. President, are you listening?
It was supposed to be the best of the best, right? Shulkin was not a doctor. That's another wave of pushback. Well, at least this guy's a doctor. I don't know how that has anything to do with the management of an organization. Many of the people who manage hospitals aren't doctors.
Well, understood.
Right,
but I mean, if you want the
management... That's what Shulkin did. He managed hospitals.
So it depends on if you want a manager or if you want somebody who is, as you've said, sympathetic to some of the problems.
You can be both.
And just also...
And right now, there's a real a question of kind of where emotionally do you stand on all of this. I mean, I think if you bring in another businessman who has no ties to the military and no ties to the medical field, maybe you get somebody who's like, privatization is a great idea. And that is what many people in the Trump administration want, but clearly what Shulkin is saying is a bad idea and would be a financial boondoggle for the department. So if you have somebody who's coming in, you know, with the medical training and the reputation and the uniform, maybe someone who has a little bit more confidence in the actual system to be able to provide this sort of health care that, you know, Shulkin is saying is the better financial approach to management, you might just default have a better option. But we don't know. That's the point at this point, because we just don't have any sort of resume on his part, on Jackson's part, as to how he runs massive organizations, because he hasn't done it before.
Usually relevant. Anyway, I think the larger point also is just look at the sheer tonnage of turnover. We're probably close to 50% of senior staff. In March alone, Secretary of State, National Security Advisor, National Economic Advisor, Transportation Secretary, Communications Director, go on and on. This is not a well-oiled machine, folks.
And look, the VA should be of specific sensitivity also. We have Paul Rykoff coming on the show. He's the head of the IAVA. It's a huge organization of veterans. They have real concerns they've gotten messed around with in the worst ways. We'll get his take on what they think about this and what has to happen going forward. That's great.
Karin Demersion, John Avlon, thank you very much. So a new report says the former top lawyer for President Trump discussed pardons for Paul Manafort and Michael Flynn with their attorneys. Could that impact Robert Mueller's investigation? We discuss all of that next.
The New York Times reporting President Trump's former lawyer, John Dowd, floated the possibility of presidential pardons for Paul Manafort and Michael Flynn. The Times reports that the conversations were with their attorneys and happened as special counsel Bob Mueller was building cases against both men. Let's discuss. We've got John Avlon and CNN legal analyst Michael Zeldin, who worked with Mueller. Counselor, let's start with you. You fill in the blank of so what? So what? Dowd was talking to their lawyers. When does it not become okay?
When the is not okay is when he is suggesting that a pardon would be a quid pro quo for their not testifying against the president in any way, shape, or form. If he is just talking to them, generally speaking, without the implication that it is intended to impact their testimony or their willingness to cooperate with Mueller, it's a little bit more benign. But if it's anywhere near the, if this impacts the president, we can make a deal, that's corrupt.
The White House is pushing back on this. As you know, the president has said we're not considering a pardon. His lawyers, his current lawyers who haven't been fired, saying not considering a pardon. What's your take?
Well, the president has said when he's been asked about this, not talking about that yet. There's a lot of weight on that yet. I think the question, as Michael said, is was this a design to sort of create an incentive for them not to start cooperating with Mueller, which was apparently unsuccessful in the case of Flynn. Manafort's still fighting it tooth and nail. But it's a power the president has. It's written, it's constitutional. There's very little ability to check that. And the question is, can that be used to try to dissuade witnesses? But this is another chapter in that ever-increasing thicket of complications facing the entire administration, and the fact that his legal team is in free fall right now.
Well, Mr. Zeldin, correct me if I'm wrong, but it would be the same category of analysis that we have with other potential obstruction things, which is, can the president do this? Yes.
Yes, he can.
But does his intent in doing it matter? Now you get into a little bit more of a sticky wicket, right? Because you have to show corrupt intent. So you would have to show not that he was just talking about pardons, but there was a quid pro quo. There was an offer dangled. And that would have been a very reckless thing for someone as seasoned as John Dowd to do, no?
You would think, yes. But remember, John Dowd has tweeted inappropriately and has also said publicly that the president cannot be charged with obstruction for doing something he has a constitutional right to do, something which is hotly debated among constitutional scholars. We have had Dershowitz on air a number of times saying exactly the same thing. But there's no question here whether or not he can be charged with obstruction of justice for corruptly pardoning somebody or not. He certainly can be charged with abuse of office and an impeachable offense. So irrespective of whether or not the president can be indicted while sitting as the president, whether he can obstruct justice for doing something he has a constitutional right to do, if he does something with a corrupt intent, with the intention of interfering with Mueller's investigation or shaping witness testimony, that is an abuse of office. That is exactly the high crime and misdemeanor that Alexander Hamilton had in mind in writing the Federalist Papers.
All right, let's talk about this now story, because there is now, according to the special counsel's office, a direct link between the Trump campaign and Russian intel officials. Okay, so this is, people have been waiting for dots to be connected, and here are some being connected. So this is a court filing from the special counsel's office in the sentencing of Alex van der Zwaan. He's one of the people, he's a Dutch lawyer, he's one of the people entangled in all of this. He lied to the special counsel. Here is the court filing. The lies and withholding of documents were material to the special counsel office's investigation. That Rick Gates and Person A, okay, that's the Russian, were directly communicating in September and October of 2016 was pertinent to the investigation. Federal Bureau of Investigation special agents assisting the special counsel's office assessed that Person A, the Russian, has ties to Russian intelligence service and had ties in 2016. During the first interview with the special counsel's office, van der Zwaan admitted that he knew of that connection, stating that Rick Gates told him Person A was a former Russian intelligence officer. John.
That would be a direct connection. We have a lot of smoke in the connections between the Russians and the campaign, efforts to influence, certainly. We found out, for example, that Gusfer 2.0, a GRU agent. But now this is somebody who worked with Gates, allegedly, and Manafort. And if the lawyer knew and if they knew, then that becomes material. It's not dispositive of collusion, but it's certainly an attempt to influence. One factor is that Gates and Manafort were not directly running the campaign at this time. But if they were communicating with the campaign, if it was influencing decisions, rhetoric, in any other way, it becomes significant. And I think CNN first reported this filing, and the fact that it's in a filing, I think, is itself significant.
Zeldin, Michael, you're still a couple of steps short, though, right? Because the context would be everything. you know, all right, so you were working with someone, I don't know why they call him Person A. Everybody knows the guy's name. It's just hard to pronounce. But the...
You mean the Russian...
Choose to call him. Right, I mean, you know, the name is out there, people, but literally it begins with a K. It's just hard to pronounce. But the point is, why were they talking to him? What was it about? As you well know, Michael, there are lots of people in that part of the world and in that around that government and sphere of influence who could get lumped into the category of being an intelligence operative for the Russian government. What more do you need to know for this to be more than an odd relationship?
Well, you'd have to know what the content of the communication was. Was it an effort to work with the campaign to influence the outcome of the election? Remember, these conversations occur at the same time or shortly after Paul Manafort is meeting with the same person who is the person who ran his Kiev office about the DNC hacks. So you have the conversation about the DNC hacks, I think, in July, August, and these conversations in September, October. And then there is a clear connection between this fellow and the Russian intelligence services, which are then closely tied to Putin. So there's a line that's being drawn. But what's so interesting to me is why this was put in almost gratuitously, but nothing is done gratuitously in Mueller's operation, in the van der Zwaan sentencing memorandum. Why did this not surface in the statement of offense when van der Zwaan was pleading guilty? So there's a message that's being sent here by including this in this obscure filing around van der Zwaan. And I think it must be something which says to Manafort, look, Manafort, we have more information than you could possibly know that will lead to your conviction. Gates will be testifying now about a Russian connection between you and intelligence officers. It's time to come home and cooperate and work with us.
Quickly, John?
Look, just remember this reality check. Presidential campaigns don't usually have multiple points of contact with foreign powers, let alone foreign intelligence agencies. And that's what we're starting to see with the GRU.
Michael Zeldin, John Avlon, thank you very much. Coming up in our next hour, we will talk with former Trump campaign manager Corey Lewandowski. What does he think about all of this? As well as State Department spokeswoman Heather Nauert.
History unfolding on the Korean Peninsula. The leaders of North and South Korea set to meet face to face. The breaking details, the stakes, next.
Doctor is in. The latest shakeup sees the president tap his personal physician to lead the VA. But Ronnie Jackson's lack of management experience is raising concerns. Now outgoing Secretary David Shulkin firing back.
A new report says the president's lawyer floated pardons for top campaign aides. Was the Trump legal team trying to keep Michael Flynn and Paul Manafort from cooperating in the Russia probe?
The date is set for leaders of North and South Korea to meet. The agenda includes denuclearization. Another step as Pyongyang evolves into a player on the world stage. Welcome back to Early Start. I'm Michelle Kosinski.
Good to have you here from Foggy Bottom. I'm Dave Briggs. It is 5:31 Eastern Time. If curbing the president's habit of Big Macs and Diet Cokes was not challenge enough, how about the second biggest federal agency, huh? $186 billion budget.
That's easy.
That's no problem compared to the prior. Another change, folks. At the top of the Trump administration, David Shulkin out as Veteran Affairs Secretary. President Trump making the announcement. Where else? On Twitter, we're told Chief of Staff John Kelly did give Shulkin a heads up. A White House official says the controversy surrounding Shulkin and questions about his travel spending had become distractions that were getting in the way. The president, of course, campaigned hard on helping veterans.
So the big surprise was not Shulkin's ouster, which had been rumored for weeks. It was who is being nominated to replace him. His personal physician, Rear Admiral Dr. Ronnie Jackson. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the nominee's performance on TV had something to do with his selection. A White House official says Dr. Jackson's White House briefing, where he praised the president's health at length, played a role. Let's take a look back at that.
There's no indication whatsoever that he has any cognitive issues. The president, he's very sharp, he's very articulate, a lot of energy and a lot of stamina. Look at his vision. I mean, he's 71 years old. I mean, he can drive if he wants to without glasses. I mean, he washes his hands frequently. He uses, Purell. The president's health is excellent because his overall health is excellent. He has incredible genes, I just assume. I think he will remain fit for duty for the remainder of this term and even for the remainder of another term if he's elected.
Standing performance, right? Yeah. President told colleagues and friends he was straight out of central casting. Dr. Ronnie Jackson still faces confirmation, which could be a bit bumpy. He's an active duty Navy physician who has served on the White House medical team for the last 12 years. In 2013, he was nominated by President Obama to become physician to the president, confirmed 100-0. CNN has learned President Trump floated Dr. Jackson as a potential replacement at the VA recently, but people he was speaking with didn't actually take him seriously.
Dr. Jackson's nomination is not going over well with veterans groups. The executive director of American Veterans, or AMVET, says tonight the momentum at the VA has come to a screeching halt. We're very disappointed, and even more so, we're concerned. We're concerned at who the nominee is. We don't see anything in his bio that makes him fit to lead.
In a stinging op-ed published in the New York Times overnight, David Shulkin takes aim at people who want to privatize the VA. He says until the past few months, veterans' issues were dealt with in a largely bipartisan way. But Shulkin says the department has become entangled in what he calls brutal power struggle.
He says, quote, solutions should be determined based on the merits of the arguments. The advocates within the administration for privatizing VA health services, however, reject this approach. They saw me as an obstacle to privatization who had to be removed. That's because I'm convinced that privatization is a political issue aimed at rewarding select people and companies with profits, even if it undermines care for veterans. Expanding private health care for veterans is a White House priority. So let's bring in CNN politics reporter Tal Koppen live in our Washington bureau. Good morning, Tal.
Good morning.
You know, reading this op-ed from Shulkin, which was lengthy, it started out being very, you know, diplomatic and even-keeled, but the ending saying, you know, I tried to have integrity, but in the end, none of that mattered. Listen to this final line. As I prepare to leave government, I'm struck by a recurring thought. It should not be this hard to serve your country. The acrimony there, Tal.
Yeah, absolutely. And this saga has taken so many twists and turns where there was rumors of an unfavorable, you know, sort of IG report or investigation into some of his behavior. And then there were allegations of people out to get him within the agency. And he was sort of very much his own spokesman for a while there. And at first, you know, the president seemed to have confidence in him. And then it seemed like there was a bit of a turn, and now here we are. And so it's almost hard to remember where this all began. And, you know, keep in mind, Shulkin was a Obama holdover that was widely respected in Congress. It did not seem like this was going to be the place, that there was going to be this much controversy. And now you have him leaving town, you know, sort of making more of, or, you know, perhaps not leaving town, but leaving the administration, making more of these accusations about folks being out to get him. It makes it very difficult to sort of separate out all the sort of back and forth and try to figure out exactly how this all went down. But, you know, I thought it was interesting. Rex Tillerson also on his way out noted that this was a mean-spirited town. So it seems that there are certainly some hard feelings left at the end of some of these cabinet officials' tenures.
Yeah, indeed.
Right. So, do you think this was about privatization, which Shulkin really focuses on in that op-ed, or is this about the travel and the bad press, or all of the above?
It's really hard to say, Michelle, at this point. I mean, all of the above seems like a safe answer in a certain capacity. I mean, the privatization issue is a little bit complicated because it's something that's sort of always been there, in the sense that there are always some conservatives who have talked up privatizing the VA, and there's quite a bit of pushback to that from the opposing side. But I haven't heard a ton of that conversation actually happening in terms of the Trump administration. And so I think in terms of that particular question, and the privatization issue, we're going to have to wait and see what the Trump administration actually does moving forward, and how Ronnie Jackson answers those questions as he moves through the confirmation process. So if that exists, it's mostly whispered at this point, but certainly it's understandable that, you know, from someone who opposes privatizing the VA, that is top of mind as a concern, and also something we see of concern from some of those veterans groups, just because of the fact of not having someone opposed to it in office. They are concerned that it could bubble up again.
Yeah, you know, but all the criticism of Ronnie's Dr. Jackson's bio, look, there's nothing in his bio that says he can, but there's nothing in his bio that says he can't lead. Many bureaucrats, experienced bureaucrats, have failed to lead the VA out of the abyss, so who knows? let's just give him a shot. Let's see how the confirmation goes. But spinning even further forward to 2020 in this ongoing battle of the census and the Trump administration deciding to include a question on citizenship in 2020 for the first time since the 1950s. They say it's about free and fair elections and getting an accurate count. On the other side, California and New York among the states that are suing, and Eric Holder taking them on. What's the real truth? You've studied this issue for years. What do you think will be the impact of including that question on the census?
Well, Dave, the problem is that we don't know. That's sort of what the main concern from critics of this move say is typically when you have the census, there's a process for testing questions. So you can be certain you have every sense of how this is going to impact actual returns. And so that's what the concern is here. There's a worry that especially amid the rhetoric about immigrants and immigration right now, that folks who get a government survey asking them to identify whether they are a citizen or non-citizen are going to be scared and they're not going to return it, and then you're going to have an undercount in primarily blue regions. So that looks bad. And the census experts who have done this time and time again aren't necessarily saying that's definitely going to happen, but they're saying there has been no testing to determine whether it will happen, and it's simply too risky a chance to take without any of the procedures that are normally followed for adding a new question to add that to a census that is going to determine, representation in Congress and federal funding for the next 10 years. Right. So that's the main concern is that uncertainty is a big gamble to take if you don't actually know how it's going to turn out.
It could lead to a less accurate count overall. We shall see.
Unintended political consequences.
Yeah.
Tal, thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, the New York Times reports President Trump's now former top lawyer John Dowd floated the possibility of pardons for Michael Flynn and Paul Manafort. The Times says Dowd raised the issue last year with lawyers for the former National Security Advisor and Trump campaign chairman. Both are now facing charges in the special counsel's Russia investigation.
Dowd's reported action raises questions about whether he tried to influence whether they would cooperate with the Mueller probe. Here's some context from CNN's senior legal analyst Jeffrey Toobin.
There is nothing unlawful about a lawyer's discussing pardons. That is a power of the presidency. Where there could be trouble is if there was some sort of promise implied or given to witnesses in the Mueller investigation that if you don't cooperate, you will get a pardon.
In a statement to the Times, John Dowd denies the report. Dowd resigned from the president's legal team last week.
All right, numbers that could be a wake-up call for Hollywood. ABC's revival of Roseanne premiered to a staggering 18.2 million viewers Tuesday. It performed best with viewers away from the coast, as you might imagine, Tulsa, Cincinnati, Kansas City, among others. Tuesday's episode actually topped the show's original finale 21 years ago by 10% in total viewers. The episode did not shy away from politics. Roseanne Barr's character revealed she is a Trump supporter, as she is in real life. The president, known to care a little bit about TV ratings, called Roseanne to congratulate her and thank her for her support. And that is extraordinary. We should not underscore how rare that is.